When I turned 40, I took myself for a solo survival walk, and I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story about that. So the plan was to go for about 12 days in the Pilbara, for about 130 kilometres, and to take with me just a soapbox size survival kit, a couple of litres of water, and literally the clothes I was standing up in. That's it, no other gear, and to find all my own food and water as I went. And I considered that to be pretty much the ideal 40th birthday present to myself, to spend a bit of time on my own in the bush. A lot of my friends thought and still think that I'm crazy, but as a survival instructor I've spent literally hundreds of hours out there and thousands of kilometres in that kind of environment, teaching people those skills to be able to work in that environment, to find their own food and water, and to travel well and safely. So I was kind of looking forward to the experience. Now the plan was, my friend David Sewell took me in his car from Perth. We left early one morning and we headed off to the Pilbara, and he dropped me off on a road pretty much midway point between Pannawonica and Millstream, for the people that know the Pilbara. If you're not familiar with the area, then suffice to say that it's the middle of bloody nowhere. And my game plan was to walk up over this hill into a valley system that ultimately led down into the Fortescue River, and from there to follow that back to Highway 1. It was country I hadn't been in before, so I deliberately wanted to, as Dean said, put myself out on that edge, not to be in a place that I was familiar with. And off I went. I set off up the hill. When I arrived at the top, I paused and looked back, and around about 1.5 kilometres away down on the flat was David's four-wheel drive, just by then a little white speck, and a couple of little ant-like shadows of men walking around packing their gear, getting ready to go. And all of a sudden I got this tingling in the soles of my feet and this sense of heat just rushing up through my body really quite quickly. It felt like my core temperature was going up at least 2 or 3 degrees. I started to get a little bit of a shake, and my heart rate went through the roof, and my breathing came right up tight in the top of my chest and started to get really shallow and quick. And I had this unbelievable urge to just run. Now, as a survival instructor heading into peak heat in the Pilbara, I'd have to say that anyone that wants to run, particularly if they've got no idea where they're running to, it's a seriously dumb move. So what I did at that moment was I actually took myself, sat down in the shade of a tree, and I just started to breathe. Taking in some nice, long, slow breaths, slowly that sort of chemical cocktail and reaction fell out of my body, and I could start to process what was actually going on. Let me tell you how that relates to authentic leadership and how it relates to men in business. So at that moment, up in this corner here, my physiological state was reactive. I'm in command of the fight, flight or flee response, basically. I've got this overwhelming desire to run or put up my dukes and tough it out with whatever is threatening me, or to stay very, very quiet and still and hope that it doesn't eat me. The part of the brain that's active at that point is this bit right down in the base of your skull, the reptilian part of our brain that commands all of our automatic responses. And the only action that you can take to get out of that particular state is to breathe. There's nothing else that'll work. Logic, reason, emotional responses, none of that stuff's going to work at that moment. I'm guessing you might have experienced that a time or two in your life, in front of other people, perhaps around your boardrooms, maybe at the point of some really big decision that you needed to make in business, perhaps in relationship with your loved ones, the people closest to you. You've probably been there. And what you need to do is pause and breathe. That lets us get into the emotional level of our physiological state. And that check-in that we did this morning was really deliberate. It's part of our business practice, and it's something that we teach our colleagues and our clients to do. Because at that point we're in our mammalian brain, this bit that sort of associates emotion and response, and there's a whole heap of chemical soup attached to that too. And emotions aren't good or bad, they just are. But unless we express them, we can't actually move past that emotional state either. So the process of checking in, of physically saying out loud what you're feeling, makes a big difference. Back to the Pilbara, sitting there in the shade of that tree, I said, I actually feel a bit anxious about this. Have I got what it takes? this feels a bit daunting. I actually said that out loud. So if you're on your own, you can express that stuff to yourself. If you're in company with trusted colleagues, then you can express it out loud to them. And if you're working with somebody that's in any of these states, then you can do them the grace and the honour of actually asking them how they feel, and just give them the time to voice it out loud. Straight away, psychologists and physiologists tell us that that straight away starts to reduce the chemical soup attached with those emotions. And in the case of some of the emotions that we typically see as more negative, things like fear and grief and anger, it reduces it really significantly and really, really quickly. What that'll do for us is it allows us to get right up into our full human brain. We've got the capacity then to be creative, to think, apply logic and reason to the full array of problems that we've got. But if we try to actually get into that state from any of these others without actually processing them properly, we just ain't going to get there. We're going to end up with problems. We're just going to keep on running into them. In fact, what happens with emotions if you don't express them is that they run around and round and round like a hamster on a wheel, and they actually start to amplify themselves rather than to dissipate. And we're not saying that what we want to do is get rid of emotion. It's just that in the process of expressing it, that allows us to get up there into the full power of our human brain. I hope that that matrix is useful for you as it has been for me, and I'd like to welcome Jeff now to the floor to share the next piece of this puzzle with you. Thank you.